Well, let's go a little bit deeper in our conversation about democracy tonight, and we're going to have a conversation up here with three of our own leaders from CSU who are passionate and experts in their field, are going to talk about our own personal role in democracy, the role of higher education, the role of Colorado State University. So I'm going to invite them to come up to the stage. I'll invite you guys to come up one by one, but Dr. Colleen Cipriani, you're the first coming up. You're the next contestant up here. Colleen is the Vice President for Inclusive Excellence, a professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, and Pathology in the College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences. Her career is focused on broadening access for historically and currently underrepresented and underserved populations, developing strategic equity and inclusion initiatives and fostering welcoming and nurturing academic and workplace climates. Under Colleen's leadership, her team supports inclusive campus environment through the active engagement of CSU employees and students. Welcome, Colleen. Dr. Kathleen Knobloch, come on up, an associate professor in the Department of Communication Studies and the associate director of the Center for Public Deliberation here at CSU. Her teaching and research focus on public participation in deliberative democracy, particularly the design, evaluation, and impact of community engagement programs on public attitudes and behaviors. Dr. Knobloch frequently works with state and community partners to design and implement programs that create opportunities for community belonging, mutual understanding, and empowered local decision-making. Welcome, Katie. Cathay Reynolds, come on up, a three-term Larimer County Commissioner and former, are you okay, Cathay? Whoops. Okay. Cathay is a three-term Larimer County Commissioner and former Director of Economic Development at CSU. She recently returned to her role as Special Advisor to the Chancellor of the system after serving as Interim Vice President for Engagement and Extension from July 22 to January of this year. In her current role, Cathay works to advance collaborative networks across the state, create economic development opportunities. She has significant experience fostering public and private partnerships in regional and rural workforce development. Cathay was a co-leader in the Food and Agriculture Key Industry Network for the state of Colorado. Born in Colorado, she's a lifelong agriculturalist. Welcome, Cathay. Okay, so I've been collecting questions from the audience, and you've got some doozies in here. So just prepare yourselves. I'm going to give you a starter question first while I look through these and see how I'm going to move through them. So my first question to all of you, I'll start with you, Colleen. How has your identity shaped your definition or maybe your experience with democracy?
Hey, so I have an answer, but I'm still like processing everything we just heard from Ms. Donna Brazil. So I need a moment. So, like many of us in this room, I have multiple salient identities. The ones that are probably obvious is the fact that I'm a Black woman. So I moved through the world as a Black woman, and I experienced the world and democracy as a Black woman. There are the things that you can't see about me. I'm a mother. I'm a Christian. I'm a woman of faith. I'm also an immigrant. I came to this country on a student visa, as an international student. So all of those things affect how I move through the world, how I experience things, and how I think about democracy. So if we think about democracy in the ways that Ms. Brazil has described, which is about peace and justice for everyone, and I think about my experiences and I think about what I do, which is constantly fighting for access and equity, whether it's here on campus or in other places, we have some work to do. We have a lot of work to do, right? If you start with where the democracy begins, right? The one person, one vote. That makes a lot of sense. It's easy math, but how many places in this country is it difficult for people to even vote? There are places where they are passing laws that make it more difficult for people, certain groups of people, to even access voting. Poorer people, people who don't have access to transportation, people who can't leave their job like I can with the appropriate leave filed to go vote. So that's what I think about when I think about democracy, and that's what I think about in terms of how, and I don't like the term identity politics, but I do believe that one's identity experiences how you move through the world, how you move through this country, and how you experience democracy.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for being here tonight. And Ms. Brazil, I so appreciated your talk, and I'm excited to talk more. So the work that I do at the Center for Public Deliberation is really focused on ground-up democracy. So how do we build the structures that enable people to connect across difference, to learn about the issues that are facing their communities, and then to do something about it? So one of the identities that I think about a lot, actually, is my role as a mother. I do my work here in Colorado, in northern Colorado, in Fort Collins, and so I often feel this obligation to help build the community, build the democracy that empowers my kids, build the systems that make them feel accepted, make them feel like they belong. So I often feel an obligation to their generation and to our community to create a future that allows for all of them to thrive. But I also grew up in South Louisiana, and I'm from a fairly segregated town in South Louisiana. I don't know that folks there would call it that, but that was my experience. And even though my family really raised me with the ethics of social justice, I was very lucky to be kind of raised in that environment. I realized kind of the older I got that I hadn't really had experiences that had taught me to connect with folks across difference. And so that's something that I take very seriously in my civic work. I have worked really hard to build the skills for learning from other people, from trying to develop mutual understanding across difference. And I try to help, I try in my work to create those opportunities for others, because I think it's only through those connections, through those conversations, that we actually learn and grow and make the tough decisions that are gonna create those communities and create that democratic empowerment. So I think partially it's acknowledging the privilege that I've had and the limitations that came with that privilege and the opportunities that came with it, and then trying to create a better future so that my kids don't feel quite so uncomfortable the first time they try to make those connections, that those skills feel more innate for them and for others in our community.
So first of all, sorry for interrupting your speech. That's a good way to make a pause, right? You fall in front. I think just a little history. My father was an American Indian, and he grew up he's a Wyandotte, so he was from Shawnee Mission, Kansas. My mother was raised on the Navajo reservation, but she was English because her father worked for Fred Harvey. So the little community of Franktown, Colorado, where I was born, was very confused. They weren't sure which one was the Indian. And so they used to put articles in the paper that said my mother went back to see her people. Well, her people were not Indian. My father's people were Indian. In that situation, we had a very eclectic group on our ranch. We grew up on a ranch in Franktown. We had, I never saw, this sounds odd, they were a mix of people of all races, because my father and my mother truly believed that there really wasn't an issue. They were raised with very different people. I can actually remember my mother getting in a fight with someone at Montgomery Wards. For those of you that are old enough to remember Montgomery Wards, we used to call it monkey wards. Getting in a fight because she gave someone who was black a quarter to get in the restroom when they said they can't go in there. My mother was smaller than me, but she was a little feisty, and the lady went in with her daughter, and they didn't kick us out, I don't think. I don't remember really well. But I think as I grow up through that, we had a working ranch, and my father was a pilot for Continental Airlines, the first American Indian pilot. In that, he didn't really tell you you were a woman or a girl. You were to work. And so as I grew up and as I went into things, I was also blessed to be raised in a very rural community. I was all of first and half a second grade in Franktown. What that meant is, regardless of who you are, regardless of what you look like, if something happens in a rural community, you come together and you make it better, because you have to. You put aside anything that you find disturbing, and you come together, you raise the barn, you get the fields in, you do whatever you can. That showed me a lot about my own community. People that sometimes you would even say, and I think as Donna mentioned, you've even expressed you don't really like those people, but when they need help, you help them, because that's what you do. because you trust them, they'll be at your door the next time. So I think that's carried me through a lot of work that I've done bringing communities together and trying very hard to do that.
Thanks, Cathay. I'm going to try to combine a couple of these questions here, which are really take a positive view about what can we do to foster more civic dialogue on campus, what you can do individually, what we can do as a campus. How do you model that for our students so that they can build a more inclusive and civil and productive dialogues with one another, especially on some of these very divisive issues? Cathay, I'll start with you and work our way back.
I think my word would be intentionality. I know when I first started working at CSU, one of the things we did was go through job descriptions. And one thing I will say is they were very white job descriptions. They were not inviting to any other situation. You went through them, you read them, they were written by someone maybe 10, 15 years ago. And that situation doesn't allow you to attract people from rural communities, from different communities. So one of the intentional things we did when I first came was go through those job descriptions. Doing that and having those conversations and intentionally, and this is on me as well, looking at it through the lens of someone who would read that job description. Are we attractive? Are we a good place to be? Are we something that you say, I would like to work there? Or is this an offensive job description that really sounds like it's in French, not Spanish? So,
Katie.
I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we foster these types of conversations, both on campus and out in our community. And I think the first thing is to not be afraid of having the conversation, but also to acknowledge that we might not know how to do it exactly. So recognizing that having conversations, particularly across difference, particularly around polarizing or contentious issues, it's a skill that we have to develop and work at. So I do a lot of work, both training out in the community. There's lots of folks in here today who have done that work with me. But we do a lot of work training out in the community. How do we train our community leaders to connect with folks in their communities, to really lead with listening? And we do a lot of work in the classroom doing those same things. I work with a number of colleagues, and we run some engaged classes here on campus. And the whole classes are built around how do we foster your skills for having these conversations? We have a class on facilitation where we train our students to go out and facilitate conversations among community members. I do similar work in the high school where we go into the high schools with my college students and we work with the high schoolers on how do you have good conversations? How do you connect with your community? How do you learn from one another through these conversations? And it's amazing what they do with that, right? This year, we're working with a group of high school students, and we help them develop a public project. One of the things that they said was that our classrooms don't always feel inclusive, and we want to provide trainings to our teachers about how to have more inclusive conversations. So we help them develop a workshop for the entire faculty at Rocky Mountain High School on bias intervention that was run by high schoolers, saying, this is what we want and need out of our classrooms. So I think it starts with listening, but also, as Cathay was saying, really intentionally building those spaces that foster inclusive conversations across difference, that are focused on building respect and understanding, focused on learning rather than winning the conversation.
That was a great answer. I think about it a lot too, and actually I got a similar question from a group of students, a group of veterinary students a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just gonna use that answer because I encourage them to do a couple of things, to be open to difference. I reminded them that one of the reasons, if not the most important reason, that we want diverse classrooms and diverse campuses is so that you can engage across difference and learn from someone who has a different background and upbringing than you do. So it's really not helpful. It's really not helpful to your own identity development as a student if you come to a place as large and as diverse as this and stay with your own in-group and don't venture out. So I encouraged our students to be open. I also encouraged them to expand their definition of allyship. A lot of times, and especially in recent years, I think my answer might have been slightly different if it was 10 years ago, but it's 2024, so I'm answering for this time. In recent years, I think many people who who do the work that I do, who do DEI work, who do inclusive excellence work, we have developed maybe a prototype of what an ally looks like, and that's not helping us in 2024. So I encouraged our students to think about and be willing to work with people who want to work with you to advance the ideals that you believe in, even if their package doesn't look like you think it should look like, or that you hoped it would look like, right? There was a speaker at our annual symposium, and I'll give a plug for symposium in a minute. It's every fall. It's for a week of activities, of learning, of educational activities around all things inclusive excellence. So that's coming up. And we had one of our keynote speakers last fall said in her session that where we are in the world, in the country, we can't afford to throw anyone away. So expand your notion and your thoughts about who can be an ally, and don't turn people away if they share your ideals and they want to help you with the work.
That's really important advice. Those are all really great answers. I'd like to stick with the theme that you all had a little bit about free speech on campus, because there's some questions here, as might be expected. You know, we are seeing students finding their voice in various ways, campus protests across the country, including here yesterday at CSU. We had a protest that was carried out on campus well within the guidelines of our free speech policy. On campus during the day, you know, we can have demonstrations like that every day on campus. And you've heard me talk about, I think that public universities like ours are foundational to democracy in this country. This is where free speech should exist. This is where it should be tested. We need our students today to be finding their voices and to be engaging in these dialogues. My goal in this, thank you. My goal in this is to keep our students safe and allow all of them on all sides of very difficult issues to find their voices and to foster a way for them to listen to each other and to find some common ground. They are our future leaders, and if they can't speak to each other, listen to each other, even in very heated conversations, we don't have a lot of hope for progress in the future. That's how I'm trying to talk to student groups. And we're engaged in this. We're neck deep in it right now. So I'd like to hear you all talk about your perceptions of free speech on campus, its role in democracy, and I think particularly the role of public land-grant institutions like Colorado State University. Katie, I'll jump to you in the middle on this one.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts. You know, first, just kind of speaking to the student protests, I think they are following a long American history of students protesting against war. Protest serves a vital function in our democratic system. It is particularly important for getting voices on the table who have been ignored, who have less power, right? It is the way that we often bring to the table those voices that have been most marginalized and least listened to. So protest has a real important function in our democracy, and our students have the right to free speech, right? So I just want to say that first, that we shouldn't be scared of protests, right? Again, I want us to lead with listening. What is it that they're actually asking for? And let's start the conversation there rather than kind of automatically putting them into political camps and pitting them against one another. More broadly, I'm proud to be a CSU RAM, in part because of its commitment to engagement, its commitment to being a land-grant university that works for the public. I believe deeply in universities' roles in fostering democracy and in creating thriving communities. And I also think that we are uniquely situated to make that actually happen. We have access to the best thinking in the entire world, and we get to bring that back to our community. We get to see what does it actually look like to implement this work in our community, and then we get to evaluate it and say, did that work in this context? Why or why not? Create research on that, and then put that back out into the world. So I really see us as kind of laboratories for democracy here at the university. I'm grateful that CSU supports that work, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to build the support and the resources that our students need to do that really extended and deep engagement that can bring out the full potential of a university like CSU.
Boy, Kate, I could not agree with you more on everything that you just said. That was, I'm really in alignment with that. And what I've been saying too, I think that is actually part of the value of attending college, part of the value of being part of a community like Colorado State University, especially for our young undergraduate population, that they are part of that experiment. They're part of that laboratory of democracy. So when they graduate, no matter what they study at CSU, they're ready. Right? They're ready to be good citizens. They're ready to vote, participate in democracy. They know how to listen, how to find fact. And I think that's value to go to college no matter what you study, in my book. Colleen?
Well, that was an excellent answer. And the only thing I can add to that is, yeah, I agree that we shouldn't be afraid of protests. And because of who I am, I always think and I remind myself that there are people in this world that are willing to risk their lives to come to this country to have the freedoms that exist here, including the freedom to protest.
I would say one thing into that. I think the land grant has an opportunity and a responsibility to model. And I think being able to, I've talked to some parents this morning who, their kids are going here, and they were talking about the protests across the state. And they said, we heard you had a protest, how was it? And I had called Lindsay the other day and said, how was the protest? She said, they came, they showed what they were after, and they worked within the guidelines, and they left. And they spoke with President Parsons, and I think modeling what we're supposed to do is hard, because I see a lot of areas, not just the university, but around the country, that speaks one thing, but they don't demonstrate the other. So I think this last year, Amy, having this discussion shows you're listening. Having some controversial speakers, some speakers that are not normally invited to campus, having kids talk about it, is something you see modeled, but you don't see it modeled very often, and I think that's important. It's important to model what we do, and as a land grant, we need to do that throughout the state, because it's very easy to say, well, those people are rural people. They won't listen the same way as the folks on the urban corridor. That's not true. They want to see you model what they want their kids to do. And they want their kids to grow up watching a model and an example. And I think our obligation is to set that.
So you all talked about, when we talked about our identity and democracy, your role as women and mothers. Let's explore that a little bit further. And the role specifically of women in democracy, women at this time in democracy, your identity as women, anything you want to add on that point. This is Women in Philanthropy. So we're going to talk about women just a little bit. So let's expand on that. Whoever wants to take that one.
Well, since I'm old enough to run for president with Joe Biden, I'll start it. I think, just to give you an example, when I started one of my shops back in the 70s, I ordered some samples. I had interior design shops, and the gentleman came in to put them in there, and I went to sign the contract, and he said, we can't give these to you, you're a woman. And I said, well, here's the Dun & Bradstreet, here's the contract. They said, no, we can't do that. So I gave him the number of my attorney, and he had a conversation, I signed the contract, and it worked. The problem with that is that wasn't that long ago. And so I think the role of women, and I don't mean this to offend any men in the room, we can go to the store, we can get a chicken, we can get celery, and we can get 2 gifts and a birthday card we're not going to need for 3 or 4 months, because we can multitask in our brain. I know that sounds offensive, I don't mean it to. But what I mean by that is you can sit and listen. And I watched Miss Brazil do this on George Stephanopoulos this last Sunday, listening to 2 people who were both right. Your comment, Miss Brazil, about the Supreme Court taking its time, which was holding up a lot of decisions, and that I apologize, I don't remember the lady who was saying that it needed to be slower. I apologize, I don't remember her name. Both had really good thoughts, and they were working with each other, because 2 things can be true at the same time. I think that is something women are uniquely qualified for, and it's why I think many times we work on things with a little more grace than we do with a little more power up front.
Okay. Katie?
So first, I just want to acknowledge that women are drastically underrepresented, particularly the higher up in office you go. We are very lucky here in Fort Collins and in Larimer to have a lot of women elected officials, but the higher up you go, the harder it gets, right? The more obstacles that are in our way. So there's a lot of women working to create change in that space and to create more openings for more folks like them to come in the door behind them. But the way that I see women showing up in democracy in my daily life is through community work. So I often see women doing the really hard, on the ground work of community, of listening, of connecting, of trying to help find collective power rather than building their own brand and their own power. I'm actually going to give a shout out to one of my colleagues and favorite collaborators, Patty Schmidt over here. She's the Community Development Director for the Office of Engagement and Extension, and her work has trained thousands of folks across the state, often women of color, in collective action, in harnessing their power and their voice. And that's the work that I see women doing every single day in communities and at Colorado State, is really working to not just empower themselves, but to empower our communities. And so I love that space. It's one of the reasons why I love working here. And I think that women are leading the way and saying we have to do democracy different. It's not enough that we just settle at the top from a top-down democracy. If we want democracy to work, it has to come from the bottom up. And I see women every day building that democracy.
Well, and since we're giving shout-outs, I'm going to give a shout-out to Betsy Markey, who's hiding there in the middle, former Congresswoman and now on our Board of Governors, because we do need more people in Congress and more women representing Colorado. So, hi, Betsy. I see you there. I see you hiding in the middle. Holly?
Women get stuff done.
No one is safe in this audience.
Women get stuff done. I'm not going to cuss with my supervisor sitting to my right here, but women,
all right.
we get
Donna
stuff
broke the
done.
barrier. She's cussing all up here. You go right ahead.
We do get stuff done. Thank you, Cathay, for reminding everyone how good we are at multitasking. But I will say, as I think about being the mother in 2024 of a 26-year-old young woman, I mean, I have a lot of things to be worried about. My daughter has less access to reproductive care than I do.
Yep, same. Yep.
I mean, I just can't. What are we supposed to do with that? So there's work to be done. You know, the morbidity and mortality of Black women giving birth is the worst in the country out of every single group, even when you correct for all the things. Socioeconomic status, degrees, education. There are racial and gender disparities everywhere, in the healthcare field, home ownership, you know, and I have a 26-year-old and a 23-year-old. He just turned 23 yesterday. I shouldn't have stumbled there. And in many ways, it feels as though, despite the social justice pioneers, and Ms. Brazil mentioned some, you know, Martin Luther King, all the people that came before, are we going backward? Have we taken 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward? What's going on? So I worry about those things, especially being the mother of 2 young adults, and I worry about what kind of democracy we're leaving for them, as well as what kind of planet we're leaving for them. So.
All right, so let's try to flip that discussion a bit, because I've got a couple questions here on the other side of that spectrum. So there's a lot of things to be worried about as mothers, as professionals, as people who are working in higher education. I've got questions here. One is, what has you most excited for the future? And another one, where do you see democracy thriving? So on the other side of the spectrum, Colleen, from what we were just worried about, what is giving you signs of hope right now for the future in democracy?
Well, some of these young people who want to protest. You know, listen, it really is up to you all, you know, not to be repetitive, but we do need young people to be involved in some of these conversations, to vote with their feet, with their voice, with their actual ballots. Yeah, so and it's one of the reasons I'm glad that I chose a college campus on higher ed and came to campus and never left, is how I describe myself, because each year we get a batch of new, bright young minds who often are exhausting, as Ms. Brazil said, but challenge us and give us new ways to think about the things that we've been teaching for how many ever decades, right? So I have a lot of hope in the future because of young people. And I think that if we get it right in terms of modeling behavior, especially around difficult dialogue for them, that it'll be okay.
Okay. Others?
Go ahead.
I'm going to echo the young people first. The program that I run in high schools, it is exhausting and infuriating and logistically challenging. But oh my gosh, they are so smart and they are so full of passion. And I really do see my job as helping them harness that passion and direct it in a way that is useful. But I also I get to see folks all across the state building democracy, building communities every day. We've been working on the Rural Action Project, where we're training rural leaders in community engagement and then having them host conversations in their communities and then develop and implement public projects. And the things that they are doing are things that we never would have anticipated on our own because we have given that power to community. Speaking of young people, a great example is this year the Teller County 4-H was a participant in the Rural Action Project. And in their meetings, the young people were lamenting the lack of kindness in their community and kind of crying out for the adults in their community to treat each other with respect, to make them feel welcome and heard and listened to and like they belong. So they're developing a public project where they're going to go to a whole bunch of community events and spread kindness, right? Connect with folks. So young people communities, they are doing amazing work when we just harness their power and let them go.
I want to add on, those are great answers. I think just to tap onto it, I think the socialization of a lot of things. First, socialization of saying I have cancer, I have a mental health disease, to be able to say these things. We're building towards a time when people can socialize something that's difficult to say. And I see that as a positive aspect in a lot of the groups that I work with. I work with a lot of rural communities, and years ago, you wouldn't say, I have a mental illness. You wouldn't say that in a small community. It's become socialized. You can look at somebody and say, are you having a problem? Can I help you? And there's work out there that's being done. I think it's leading us to something, but I think we have to be braver in some of these situations. Just because it sounds easy, it doesn't mean that there's not a situation that you're going to have to step into and say something that's really going to hurt your stomach before it comes out of your mouth. But I think it's important that we get there. We're on a roll of opening the door to conversations that were difficult. I don't want to let us ease off that. I think it's time to make those conversations more transparent. The work that Patty's doing, the work that everybody's doing, these democracy conversations, speakers like Donna, having those, you have to go forward and you have to say it, and then watching what happens and asking that question.
Yeah. I find hope whenever I see students showing up in person to the events that we have, because it means that they're not looking at their phones for an hour or two, that they are with people, talking to each other, talking with us, and that's really encouraging for me to see. So I think the more events that we can have where students are showing up in person, having community, having dialogue, that's what we have to keep, I think, just after all the time. So it's interesting because I have two sort of opposing questions here, so I'm going to read them off together and you can think about how to answer, because one is, what's the best way for young people to make their voice heard in today's political landscape, which is a question that we asked Donna at the end. The other one is, you all basically stress the importance of youth engagement, and why does it all fall on us? So it's like, why do you keep telling us that it's on us? And on the other hand, there's a question of, what's the best way for us to engage? So I hear you, right? Who answer that question of, why does it all fall on us? And you're all up on stage talking about it falls to our young people, because it does in some ways, but I also hear them saying, what are you all doing about it, and why are you putting it all on us? So make of these questions what you will.
It's on y'all because y'all are young and we are old. I mean, I didn't know how to say old. No, listen. I think that this is funny. What was the first question? I just want to
One question is, what is the best way for our young people to engage in today's political atmosphere? And the other question is, why do you keep telling us we're the ones who have to engage? And
I think the best way to engage is the way that feels right for you. So there's that's one of the things. It's a blessing to be in the United States of America. There's multiple ways for you to get involved in multiple, multiple causes. That's the best word. But again, going back to what I said about being an ally and accepting individuals even though they don't come in the package, I think you need to figure out, we all need to figure out, what works best for us. One of the things I say about myself and many of the people I work closely with is we're all activists, but in our own way. The way I am an activist may not match how you be an activist, but if we share the same values and we're working towards the same goal, what does it matter? In reality, it takes all of us, right? So I think the best way for young people to get involved in ways that are meaningful for them and that allows them to be true to themselves and in ways that they're comfortable and not because somebody else thinks this is the right way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Katie?
So I'm going to agree. The first step is just anything, and it all counts, right? Like talking to your neighbor counts, joining an organization counts, voting counts. It counts. Please, everybody vote. Encourage everybody in your life to vote. So all of it counts. I also encourage folks to kind of de-center politicians. So instead of worrying about what our elected officials are doing, start taking some kind of ownership over what democracy takes and asks of all of us. As we just heard, right, we are all going to enter democracy in different ways. We all have different gifts and different passions and different talents to give to democratic life. It's about finding the ways that you can contribute to your community, making sure that you're continuing to connect, making sure that even though it's hard, even though it's tiring, we just keep showing up and doing the work day after day after day. And unfortunately for young people, I think y'all play a really pivotal role, in part because you are both not jaded and can see the systems, right? I think sometimes as we get older and we begin to navigate these systems, you don't always see the water that you're swimming in. But as a young person, just kind of learning about them and understanding them and preparing to enter them, I think it's often easier for young people to see the injustices, to see the inequities, to say, why are we doing it this way? This does not seem to work. So I think young people have a really important way of kind of reminding us the systems, the way they are, do not have to be the way that they always are. We have the power to create change, and I often see young people really leading that charge and really reminding us that there is a different path forward if we're just brave enough to take it.
Cathay?
Just to add, and I really like the part, Katie, about it doesn't matter what you do. I think it's important, something that's very important to you, maybe not important to me, and I want to get involved in this. I think getting involved, just the act of getting involved, is one thing that leads us forward, because you learn how to do it. One thing I'll say about Gen X and Gen Z, they're very forward young people. I admire that, because there were times, and I'm sure some of us here would remember, we would never say that to the president of a university.
Yeah,
They
don't hold back anymore. Yeah.
But they feel like there is an impulse right now. There's a fragility in their society, and the reason for those folks that said, why are you keep pointing at us, is because maybe we screwed it up, and we want you to fix it. And maybe it's the fact that, kind of like your own kids, you try to tell them what they shouldn't do because you did it, and you don't want them to go through it. But you can't stop someone from going through their own life. So you have to be there, and you have to counsel them, and you have to help them. But helping them learn how to say those things, that's our responsibility. Your responsibility, because you are the younger generation, is to take those bits and pieces that we give you and throw out what you don't like, but mentor someone who's leading you and stick with them and follow your own path.
Cathay, I'm going to ask you a personal question, because you've put yourself out there and you've run for office several times. Was there something in your life that inspired you to make that leap in democracy and actually run for office yourself?
Well, as I said, we grew up on a ranch, and this is an actual incident, moving cattle, if you've all been on a ranch, standing in the middle of a cattle pen. You get a little confused. I'm pretty short. And my father said, for God's sake, just don't be a post. And And truthfully, that comes back to me. That's number one.
That's
Number
really
two,
good advice.
and so the second one was when I did run for office. There was a gentleman here in town, Dr. Bob Graves. His son, Rob Graves, started the Noosa Dairy. Bob Graves worked very hard at the legislature for a lot of reasons for agriculture. And I worked with him on a lot of panels. And he said, if you're going to gripe, change it. Run for office. And I had been griping fairly significantly. And so I either felt the obligation to step forward or step back. But as I said, as I grew up, there was nothing in my family that said, you can't do this because you're a woman or you're a girl. It was, we need the work done. So I stepped forward and I did it. And it was probably one of the best things I ever did.
Katie, how about you? Was there something in your life that... something that inspired you to go into this work professionally?
It's interesting to have heard Ms. Brazil talk about the study abroad experience. I've had a lot of things that I think led me to this path, but I think one of them was actually doing study abroad during the 2004 election. I was in England, not anywhere super glamorous. But I remember watching the election from afar and just wanting to be in it and wanting to do something, right? So when I came back to the States after the election was over, I kind of switched gears. I thought I wanted to be a journalist. I was quickly understanding that I was not aggressive enough for that field. And so I found political communication and civic engagement. And in a lot of the classes where I knew that that was the path I wanted to pursue, we were only talking about what politicians did. We talked about what powerful folks in the media did. We talked about what politicians did and how they shaped the narrative and how they influenced things. And I kept wondering, where are the citizens? Where is the public? And so I started asking my professors, who's studying this? Why does no one else talk about citizenship? I think that if we're talking about democracy, we need to be talking about the public. And I had some great professors who pointed me on a pathway, and I just kind of kept along the way getting connected to professors and to institutions and to folks who were trying to do the work of building democracy. So in some ways it was kind of a jolt, and in some ways it was a long progress of just sitting in the room with folks and seeing what was possible.
Mm-hmm. Colleen, how about you? Any early experiences that inspired you to go into this professionally, that brought you here to be on this stage talking about it?
Early experiences. Let's see. I did not plan on doing inclusive excellence work full time. I was supposed to be a microbiology professor full time, and what started as we get stuff done, women get stuff done, so I'm gonna go over here and help in this area, and I started to learn about this as a field, and I really grew to understand the systems and where the systems had problems. I mean, even on a wonderful land-grant campus like this, who created to provide access to education for everyone, the systems don't all support that ideal. Mm-hmm. So my lived experiences as a Black woman on a predominantly white campus is what drove me to start helping with the work, and what drove me to start doing it full time.
All right, I'm gonna ask you each a little dicey question, and then we're gonna come around for any final words of advice, because I didn't ask Donna to give me advice as president. She gave me great advice as president, which I appreciate very much, and I will always take. We're all in leadership positions at the university. We've been undergoing this thematic year of democracy, bringing in amazing speakers like Donna Brazil, Republicans, Democrats, actors, comedians, people with all different views on it. That's a start, right? We have really high voter registration among our students, like 75% of our students vote. We're way up there, and we need to really focus on that, right, in this next year. Especially coming into this presidential election cycle when our new freshmen arrive on campus in the fall, right? Register them to vote, get everybody engaged, right? So my dicey question to you, because this is aimed at me as well, but we're all in leadership together, what could we be doing better right now at CSU to foster democracy?
I think one of the things that we have to remember is that democracy does not happen every 4 years. And so fostering real democracy requires sustained efforts over time. You might get a few days off, but you don't get a year off. You don't get a season off. Democracy is happening all the time. There are local elections that really, really matter and impact our lives that our students can vote in all the time. So I think making democracy a part of our everyday life on campus is something that I think is really important. And then I also think, academia has in large part really moved away from communities in some ways that hurts our ability to understand what our work means out in the world. And so I think fostering engagement across the university in the sciences and the arts and the humanities, everywhere across the university, the more we are getting out and interacting with the public and helping them build the futures that they want, helping empower them, right, the better able our communities are going to be to enact democracy. You can't just every 4 years expect everybody to just show up and vote and then we'll stop and then 4 years later they're all going to be charged up again. It really is, how do we build those sustained networks, those sustained communities so that we have an undercurrent of democracy in every single thing that we do.
Absolutely. Cathay or Colleen, advice on what we can do better?
I just add on to what Katie said. I don't think democracy is a thing. It's a constant source of how you act with people. Working in meetings, working with your staff, working with constituents, it's how you act. There's a democratic act to working with people. I think Donna called it trust, some call it grace, but it's also just the act of working with people in the right way. And then I think as leadership, it's our obligation when you begin to see an area of expertise or a meeting going on or something going on where there's a certain folks are not being involved in that. Mm-hmm. You have to include them. You have to include them in that conversation. And many times it's very easy to just listen to the folks that sound like you. There's an intense need for people to feel like you invited me to this question. Being invited to share my feelings is really important. And I think we can do that. We can do it better, but it takes a lot of intentionality because it's a constant technique of how you live your life that brings you to a vote where you then feel like you're able to do that. You've gone through it. You've felt it. You do your own research. It's time to vote regardless of the level. You've done the research. You feel confident in what you do because it's how you're treated in your life.
That's right. Colleen?
I would add that we have a wonderful list of ideas called the Principles of Community. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think one of the ways we could be doing better in this area is to really expect and demand people uphold our principles of communities all day, all the time. When they're in meetings, when they're teaching, we need to hold ourselves and each other accountable for those principles, because without those principles, there's no democracy.
All right, that's very good advice. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also call out as a reason for hope our current student body government. We have the most engaged students right now who are running for ASCSU, running for office. They are lobbying at the state capitol for funding for higher education. We have our president, Nick DeSalvo, here in the front, who was just elected for his second term. So he signed up for duty twice. That's tough. That doesn't happen very often, that we have students who run, they go through their year, and then they run again. I'm grateful for Nick. I'm grateful for his administration, and students who are really exercising their leadership muscles in that way, not just at ASCSU, but in clubs and organizations by the hundreds and thousands across the university where they get to be leaders for the first time, run for the first time. And again, I think that that's a really important value proposition for higher ed. So we clearly are so fortunate to have such an engaged group of community members in Fort Collins, at Colorado State University, among our students. As we wrap up, any last words? I think we're out of time, but any last words for our community that's here today about democracy that we did not cover? Cathay, any last words?
I don't think so. I think it's just practice. We've got to practice it.
We're going to practice not being fence posts.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
Katie.
I think I'll practice walking, but I think, the fence post thing.
Katie.
Quickly, I think, democracy is a collective act. It requires all of us doing it every day, and then also really leading with listening. So come from a place of a real earnestness to learn, to do better, to be open, so that we can make the best decisions for our entire community.
Right. Last word, Colleen.
I'll repeat a word that Cathay used, intentionality, and I will add that one of the things that I always do, and I would ask that, to the extent that you're comfortable, do the same wherever you sit, is to be thinking about who isn't in the room, who's not at the table, who isn't at this meeting, whose voices aren't here and therefore need to be lifted up, and how do we get their voices?
That's great. Well, Donna, thank you again. And it sounds like you're going to have to come back and visit us at Colorado State University, because it's not just, it's happening all the time, right, as part of the dialogue. So please come back. And I especially want to thank these three leaders up on stage, Cathay and Katie and Colleen. I'm so grateful to be able to work with them every day, and CSU is a better university because they are leaders here. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight.